Hello, we're continuing our run through 32 days and 32 videos previewing every team going to the World Cup in Qatar, and today's team is the Pot 4 team in Group C, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the qualifiers from Asia that are going to their second consecutive World Cup. And how did they get here? Well, Asian qualifying requires you to play a lot of matches. They did not get a particularly easy draw. They started in the second round against Uzbekistan, Palestine, Singapore, and Yemen. Now, you might not know it, but Uzbekistan is actually pretty good. They were 1 point away and goal difference away from qualifying for World Cups over the last 2 times. So this is a brutal draw for Saudi Arabia, but they handled it brilliantly. They won 6 of their 8 matches. They won their group, which is the only automatic spot to qualify for the next round. And in that group, Saudi Arabia looked equally fantastic. You have to finish top 2 in your final group in Asian qualifying to automatically go to the World Cup. Well, Saudi Arabia finished top 1. They finished ahead of Japan, and they got there early. They won 7 of the 10 matches they had to play, and they dropped points in 2 of their final 3 when they were essentially taking their foot off the gas after having already qualified. But seriously, they drew to China and lost to Japan in their third to last and second to last match before clinching a win to head to the World Cup with a win in their pocket in their last competitive match. With Japan and Australia in their group, this could have been very tricky, and it was for a lot of teams, notably China, Oman, and Vietnam, but Saudi Arabia handled it easily. And that is a good and welcome sign for a team that hasn't necessarily reached the heights that it used to reach. Because Saudi Arabia is just recently returning to the fold at the World Cup after having been a regular presence at it from 1994 to 2006. Saudi Arabia had never actually qualified for World Cup before that, but they made it to the World Cup and immediately got to the knockout stage in 1994 in their first tournament ever. After that, they puttered around in the group stage for the next 3 tournaments before missing back-to-back World Cups. They got back to it in 2018, and now they're back to it again in 2022 with one of the more impressive qualifying performances that you can possibly put together in Asia. Something interesting to note, though, is even though they qualified for the World Cups in 98, 2002, and 2006, they actually didn't pick up a win. In 2018, however, they did. They beat Egypt in the final match day. They also gave group winners Uruguay a heck of a game. Only 1 goal for Uruguay made the difference, 1-0. But for Saudi Arabia, it was their 3rd ever win at a World Cup, and they'll be looking to do one better, perhaps, in Qatar. The bad news is that in the other competitions that Saudi Arabia has been competing in, they haven't exactly been on fire. See, the Asian Cup is how they determine the Asian champion. It happens once every 4 years, a year after the World Cup. So the last one was in 2019. Saudi Arabia used to run this competition. They've won it 3 times in 84, 88, and 96. You'll notice this is around when they made the knockouts at the World Cup and won a couple games. Their first 5 Asian Cups, they actually made the final every single time. But recently, that success has not been there. In 2011 and 2015, Saudi Arabia didn't even get out of the group stage. But in 2019, the most recent one with the team that will look fairly similar to the one that shows up in Qatar, they did get out of the group stage, but they finished behind Qatar in the groups and were promptly eliminated in the knockouts. The draw did put them up against Japan, but this is also a team they were able to handle in World Cup qualifying. Perhaps also concerning is the fact that Saudi Arabia didn't have a single player score over 2 goals over the course of the entire tournament, which is 4 games. But there is a player who wasn't necessarily a huge impact player in 2019 that's on the team now that could change all that, and that is our player to watch for the Saudi Arabian national team. This guy right here, Faris Al Buraikin. He's a 22-year-old number 9, plays right in the center of the attack, who already has 24 appearances for Saudi Arabia. When Saudi Arabia beat Japan in World Cup qualifying, he scored the winning goal. And he has 5 other goals for Saudi Arabia so far, and he's just getting going. Unlike most of the rest of this team, he doesn't have World Cup experience yet. This is going to be his first major tournament as a feature piece of the Saudi Arabian national team. And if it's a sign of good things to come, Al Buraikin was a feature part of the Saudi Arabian under-23 team that won the U23 Asian Cup earlier this year. Now, like the rest of the team, he does play in the Saudi Arabian League. That usually makes Saudi Arabia a hard team to project. They're similar to Russia. They're similar to Qatar. They have a domestic league that's not necessarily considered top level, but hosts an entire national team that can qualify for the World Cup anyways. Now, it's hard to project how a player like this will match up against the world's best at the World Cup. He's only played in Saudi Arabia. He's only played in Asian, maybe even Asian youth tournaments. But both Football Manager and FIFA mark Al Buraikin's potential very highly relative to the rest of the Saudi Arabian team. So if he is going to match that potential that he has flashed and that game-changing ability that he showed against Japan to score the winning goal, then he could be the guy that carries Saudi Arabia's front line past where it was able to go before, because the rest of the team looks very familiar. If few of these guys have played elsewhere. They did some loans to La Liga before the 2018 World Cup, but they all play in Saudi Arabia now. They've given up on that strategy and they're developing the team together. But unlike teams like Qatar that have that togetherness and they all play in the same league, Saudi Arabia has that togetherness, plays in the same league, and they all played at the World Cup 4 years ago. Mohamed Kano in the midfield, Salem Al-Dosari, the number 10 who plays out on the wing. Al-Owais is still the goalkeeper. Salman Al-Faraj is still that attacking midfielder if they line up in a 4-2-3-1. It's a 4-2-3-1 that sits Al-Faraj in between playmakers like Al-Muwallad, Garib, Al-Dosari, and then of course Al-Baraikin in front. This is their lineup going up against Australia in the final World Cup qualifier. It's also very similar to the tactic that Saudi Arabia used in a win against Japan towards the beginning of qualifying. This also means that Al-Baraikin has to be able to put a couple of goals in if Saudi Arabia is going to succeed at the World Cup, because he is the feature of this offensive setup. The center backs have a little less experience. Al-Amri would be going to his first World Cup if he tapped in, and he has been getting a lot of starts in the back line. But it is worth mentioning that in friendlies against Ecuador and the United States, both of which Saudi Arabia drew 0-0, the Saudis experimented with a 4-3-3 instead. This gives them a little more defensive solidity, slides that midfielder that would be Al-Faraj back so they can create a better defensive barrier in front of their back line, and it still gets their best players forward. But they didn't score in those 2 games, but you know, in principle, it gets their best players forward. What are the team's chances of actually getting out of the group and going on to succeed, to accomplish something? I don't think that they are high. Now, going to a World Cup, every team has earned the right to be there and has a chance to beat the other teams around them. Poland certainly is capable of struggling at a major tournament. Mexico's on a bit of a downswing. Argentina is too far away for Saudi Arabia to reach. But if a few shots go the right way, anything is possible. There is just a difference in quality. Now, there is the unknown quantity of the fact that we don't see any of these guys play on any regularity at all. We just have the results to go off of, and those results 4 years ago essentially say that Saudi Arabia going up against Russia and then Uruguay at the 2018 World Cup was absolutely no match. And unless Al-Baraikin hits all of his potential right now, I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to have the goal scoring power to survive long term. Encouraging draws against Ecuador and the United States, though, maybe give them a shout that if they can lock up in this 4-3-3, they can get a couple of draws, maybe pop a goal off a set piece, and you never know. But I'm picking them to finish last, and their chances of winning the World Cup are absolutely at none. If they were going to do that, they would need to win more matches at this World Cup than they've ever won in every other World Cup combined. It's probably just not going to happen. If Saudi Arabia gets to the World Cup knockout stages, it is a massive upset.